With a year to go till the 2024 US presidential elections. Now, the big question is America headed for a Trump versus Biden rematch? Now, according to opinion polls, the former President Donald Trump is leading in case it was to be a rematch of what happened in 2020. And he's leading in those key battleground states that are really important for deciding who is going to be the president of the United States. It seems that as Biden aims for a second term, his approval among citizens is slipping, and doubts about his age in particular are rising. On the other hand, Trump is the undisputed Republican frontrunner right now, despite facing multiple criminal trials, including allegations of poll interference. So the countdown has clearly begun for a high-stakes and closely watched election. The question is this the showdown that America is ready for? The short answer, not quite. According to the polls, both Biden and Trump suffer from low popularity. However, for those who overwhelmingly believe that the country is heading in the wrong direction, but they seem to be directing their frustrations at the incumbent president. That's somewhat logical. If people are unhappy, whom do they blame for that? Well, not the former president. They tend to blame the present leader. And for more on this, we're now being joined by Crystal Knight, who's a podcast host of Crystal Knight Show, and also by Justin Olson, pollster with American Pulse. Crystal, if I could just start with you. Wanted to ask you about these opinion polls, right? Okay, it's just one poll, but it must be a little bit alarming for the Democratic Party, seeing as 5 of the critical battleground states seem to be moving from Biden to Trump.
Well, I think what you referencing as it relates to the polling numbers, it's not that Donald Trump is getting stronger, it's that President Biden is actually getting weaker. If we look at the swing states and we break out the crosstabs of the polls, former President Donald Trump is really leading in some states by 2 percentage points, in other states by 4 or 5. And what the poll numbers are showing is that Donald Trump is really in the same position that he was in 2020. And so the question for Democrats and for the Democratic Party is, what can we do to make up the gap in these key swing states like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, like Ohio, even states like Georgia? But even then, if President Biden isn't the person who should be leading the top of the ticket, it is time now to reconsider if we should select another person. But if it's not, what will his advisors do to make sure that we can make up the gaps in these respective states, and how we can message to the base of his supporters about why he deserves a second chance?
I'm just going to ask you to pause that thought about another Democratic candidate just for a second or two. But Dustin, your take on this, because look, if you look at what those polls are really showing, if 5 of the swing states go from Biden to Trump, then if an election was to be held tomorrow, Trump would once again be the president of the United States, and by a landslide.
Yep. So we actually, for American Pulse, my polling firm, we did a poll at the end of last week, and we found the exact same thing on our national survey. 2 things. First, we found that Donald Trump has increased his support within the Republican primary. We actually asked Republican primary voters, do you think the primary is basically over? And they said yes. Now, Crystal just pointed out what I think is what President Biden's biggest challenge is, that we asked the same kind of question of Democrats, and Democrats said about 36% said that they definitely want Joe Biden to be their nominee, and 35% said they want somebody else. And then we went ahead and just said, well, who would you like? And again, only about 35% said Joe Biden, and 17% said Gavin Newsom, and then other people after that. So there's definitely people are looking to have somebody different as president.
Dustin, so if you actually look about it, at least on the Republican side, there are people who've thrown their hat in the ring. There are many challengers to Donald Trump in the Republican Party. There aren't right now for Biden. So there are people who are saying we want to be the Republican candidate. The polling that we are seeing right now, does that, you think, reflect a pro-Trump vote, or is it an anti-Biden sentiment?
Yeah, it's a great question. They actually have very similar, we asked favorabilities, they actually have very similar favorabilities and unfavorabilities. We asked people, do you have a favorable opinion? Do you have an unfavorable opinion? And they both have basically very exactly the same favorable numbers. So there's definitely people who are very unfavorable to both of them, and there are people who are very favorable to Donald Trump. I would say the problem for Joe Biden is there's not that many people who are very favorable for Joe Biden.
Kristal, let's just turn back to that question of a second possible candidate in the Democratic Party right now. Look, there's nobody in the Democratic Party right now that seems to be challenging Joe Biden. It's almost being seen as a fait accompli that he is going to be the candidate once again. But let's face it, there are a lot of people who've got questions about Biden now. The question of his age is clearly becoming a bigger and bigger issue, a question of how he's handling things like the economy, how he's handling foreign policy, the fact that the world seems to be falling apart under his watch. All of that could be hitting him very much. He is the guy who's going to end up getting blamed for this, whether he likes it or not, because he is the president. Is there going to be a moment where the Democratic Party says, all right, we need to sit back a little bit, we need to think about these issues, and the age issue in particular, and we need to find someone else?
Well, I think, that's something that the Democratic Party is staring down the pipe hole right now. We already seen David Axelrod, who is a deep and long Obama supporter, come out and say that the president should reconsider. There have been people who've already stated that they intend to, or they would like to primary President Biden. Cornel West, Phillips, Marianne Williamson. There are people like that, but they're not the most viable candidates to actually challenge a President Biden in the primary. They don't have high name recognition. Dustin mentioned Gavin Newsom, which is the governor of California. He likely has a better chance, but candidates like Gavin Newsom absolutely will not step up to the plate unless the Democratic establishment is behind them. And what that means is President Biden has signaled or has stated that he does not intend to run. Until that happens, until the president and his advisors make a collective decision that he is not the best person to move this country forward, I don't think that we'll see any real viable candidates step up and get into the ring without the party actually supporting their candidacy or their attempt to even have a primary. And so I think that the Democratic Party is really at a crossroads right now. Should we stick with the president and make him stronger on all of these things that you just mentioned, like immigration, foreign relations, inflation? These are things that the president is failing on, particularly among Black supporters, young supporters under the age of 30, and Latino supporters. Or should we change course and find another candidate now? Because we're, a few months away from the new year. And if we're going to make a change, we have to do it in short order.
Dustin, well, there are about a year to go for the elections, almost exactly a year to go for the elections. A couple of months back, it was looking Biden versus Trump was a sure shot. Now, questions around Biden. I'm not saying that it will not be Biden. It may well be Biden, but there are at least some questions around that. Let me ask you this question. Is it definitely Trump on the other side? Is it definite that Trump will be the Republican Party's candidate in 2024?
Yeah, so in our American Pulse survey, which people can go to pollingclub.com to get for free if you'd like to see the numbers yourself, we actually had the former president at a 49-point lead nationally, and everybody else, the closest to him is DeSantis at 12%. That's just really historic as far as lead goes. And we asked Republicans, do you believe that this primary is over? And almost 70% said, yes, it's over. So we're really talking about who can get into second place, but second place is in the low teens. So I don't really think that that's possible. It will take malfeasance in order to have somebody else be the nominee.
All right, Dustin, Kristal, thank you so much for joining us. Let's see how it all pans out over the next 12 months.